Hi, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's supported this channel so far. If you've subscribed, thank you, you keep this channel running and you've made this all possible. And hello new subscribers, I see you. We've finally reached 300 subscribers and I didn't think it was possible. And it's mostly due to our last video, so if you've seen that video and you liked it and you subscribed, thank you so much. If you haven't, you can check this video out here. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, so let's just dive straight in. These are the top 5 culture shocks tourists have in Japan. Number 1, no tipping. So this concept in particular can be quite unusual to most tourists when they go to Japan for the first time at least. For me, when I went, I was already kind of aware that no tipping was a thing in Japan. It's quite different to the UK where tipping is quite normalized, but in Japan I'd read up online that that's not the case. So for me it wasn't too hard to adjust to that fact, if I'm honest. So there may be a couple of reasons why it's not respectful to tip in Japan. As far as I'm aware, as far as I've seen online, I think it's mostly to do with the fact that employees show a great amount of loyalty and respect to their boss, and tipping may undermine them in some sort of way. I think the general gist of it, that I got at least, was that employees are paid well enough already, and so there's really no need to tip them, I think. I've also read online that it can be rude to give like cash in hand, so I think a more respectful way to do this would be give the cash in a pochibukuro envelope. No Japanese person has ever actually explained this to me directly. For me in Japan, when people try to tip, it's just, they just decline it and they don't say anything. It's just, that's the way it is. So let me know if you're from Japan, maybe you have a better explanation than I do for this. Where the UK is concerned, it's completely different, I think. So take this for an example. I'm a waitress, and if in the UK, if someone offered me a tip, it would kind of be rude to decline it. Like at first I put my foot down and go, no, please don't, like it's too much, like please keep it for yourself. But then if they persisted and insisted that I receive the tip for my service, it would kind of be rude to decline it in a way. In the UK, it's just so different to Japan. To accept it would be polite, and it would make them happy because they've appreciated the service that I gave, and they've been able to give me something in return. And also in the UK, I think tips can make a huge difference to your wage. I mean, I'm paid minimum wage, and tips make a huge impact on me, especially. So I think we're more inclined to accept tips, and it's a really, really lovely gesture. And it makes me really happy when I receive a tip. Obviously at first I feel a bit guilty and that I can't take it. But then if they really do want to give me a tip and I accept it, it feels good for both them and me. And I think that's a big part of why it takes certain tourists so long to adjust to this fact. And a lot of people resist it at first. I think Lucas, there was a time in an izakaya where Lucas tried to tip, and I still to this day don't really understand why he did it. Like, I'd gone to the toilet and he just insisted on trying to tip. And as far as I'm aware, I think he did it because in the UK, as I say, it's so different. I think you're just expected to tip if the service is really good. And like in Japan, the service is incredibly good. It's impeccable. So you just feel obligated to do so, to give something back in some sort of way. You feel like you really want to give them a tip. But in Japan, it's not expected. It's and maybe even rude. I think people I've known as well, like maybe my family members, have also mentioned that if they ever went to Japan, oh, they definitely tip. And I'm like, why? Like, it's not required, it's not expected of you, and it's culturally, we're so different in that department. For me, as far as I'm aware, in Japan you don't tip, and that's the way it is, and I accept that. But I do kind of understand why people are resistant to it at first. They want to give something back, like I've said, and they just can't get out of that mentality where it's just how they were raised, how they grew up, so it's hard to undo that. For me, instead of tipping, I guess I tried to be really polite and really gracious and thank them, arigatou gozaimasu, like any chance that I could, and just try and make conversation, even though it's like really basic conversation. I just tried my best to like show them how much I appreciated the great service that they provided me. But I'm kind of curious, if you're from Japan, let me know in the comments, like if a tourist gave you a tip in a pochibukuro envelope, would it make a difference? Would you accept it? Or is it just a complete no, like no tip whatsoever? Number 2, no bins. So this is not the first time I've mentioned this, like this is old news at this point where Japan is concerned, I'm sure. And it's one of the things that stood out to me most when I went there to Japan. This mic is really high. Ooh. So this in particular takes time to get used to when you're out there. I think in the UK, we don't really have tons of bins, but they are around, and it's readily available. If you need to dispose of rubbish, I mean, bins are there. Yeah, it's kind of the way it is. But in Japan, they're nowhere to be seen. And when I say nowhere to be seen, I mean nowhere. And yet somehow it's spotless. Like everywhere you look, it's completely clean and organized and tidy and miraculous in every way possible. So as a foreigner, you might find that a bit odd. In some way, you might be like, where the heck are they? Because I know I was like that when I first went to Japan. I was thinking like, am I delusional? Am I blind? Like, where are the bins? And I quickly caught on to the fact that people would take their own rubbish with them. Like, if you have any extra packaging or anything, you just keep it in your bag and then you dispose of it when you get home. Or if you're at like a street food stall, you would eat at the stall, outside the actual store that you bought the food from, and then dispose of the rubbish there, because they have like little bins. So this in particular was like really odd to me at first. And it's something that I did actually miss about the UK, weirdly. So in the UK, people do tend to eat and walk. Like, it's a common thing. And I didn't really appreciate how much freedom there is in that. In the UK, it's quite enjoyable to have like a snack or have some street food and walk around and see the sights and enjoy the views. And I didn't understand how great that was until I went to Japan. But I do appreciate why things are the way they are in Japan, and I think it works really well. And it works in their favour. It's completely tidy, it's organised, and it's really respectful. But in the UK, it's just different. Like, for me, I'd feel really odd waiting outside the store and eating. Like, I'd feel a bit on edge, like, with them watching me, as if they're watching for my response. Like, if I didn't like it in some way, I'd feel like the pressure to pretend that I liked it, and that I have to just eat it regardless, and I couldn't dispose of it in any way. And I'd be kind of restricted. Like, I want to look around, I want to see things. And it's because it's okay in the UK, and I'm not going to just chuck my rubbish anywhere on the floor, though some people do. I'm going to find a bin anyway. To me, there's no problem in it. But in Japan, I understand it is completely different, and it's something that you should look out for and be respectful of and adjust to slightly. Also in the UK, I kind of tend to move out the way because I don't want to be in the way of the other customers that are being served after me. So that's why I kind of move. It's kind of normal to move out of the way, away from where you were stood when you're eating. Does that make sense? Number 3, cash, not card. This also took me a little time to get used to. So in the UK, card is everywhere. Like, we don't even know what cash is anymore. We're living in the future, okay? So there'll be a lot of restaurants and a lot of places where you go to eat and they literally don't even take cash. It's literally just card. Even the place where I work, personally, only takes card. But in Japan, it's like the complete opposite. A lot of the time you do need cash on you. And something like this in the UK would just never work, I feel like. It would just be really irresponsible to take a lot of cash out with you in the UK, because I feel bad for saying it, but you could be robbed. I know that sounds really bad, but it's kind of true in some ways. It's just something that you have to deal with in the UK. If you grew up here, you know that not everyone is trustworthy. Awkwardly, it's kind of sad, but it's the way it is. So in England, where I'm from, I always make sure that I have enough cash on me, but that it's not too much. And I also make sure that it's close to my purse. Also make sure that it's close to my person. Nowhere someone can take it away from me and nick off with it. But in Japan, it's very, very different. You have a lot of cash on you. I'm not saying that you flash it around everywhere and like go crazy, but there is a different level of trust out there. I feel like if you lost your wallet, say in Japan, I feel like there's a good chance, I could be wrong here, but I feel like there's a good chance that someone would hand it in instantly, in fact. And they do their very best to find the person it belongs to. Whereas in the UK, I've definitely had instances like that. I think I've lost my phone quite a few times because I'm an idiot. And the bus drivers really helped with that. They made a huge effort to make sure that it got back to me. Obviously, I made the effort also in equal part, phoning them up and giving my details, and it got back to me and it wasn't stolen. But, and here's the but, I felt incredibly lucky that happened. Whereas in Japan, I feel like it would almost be a given. Does that make sense? In the UK, you have to be very, very careful and responsible for your belongings. And if they're stolen, it wouldn't be unheard of, and it definitely would be expected, at least from me. That's how I was raised. I was raised to be very careful of my belongings and the things I leave hanging around, make sure that I don't do that. So when I went to Japan last year, I can't recall a time that I used card. I think it might have been the very end of the trip that I may have run out of money and used card, possibly, and you more than likely use a lot of cash. Or a Suica card. So Suica cards we really loved. We love to use those. I think they're incredibly useful. You can even use them with vending machines, restaurants, on buses and trains, I believe. I think they have a multitude of uses, and they're really convenient. So I recommend getting a Suica card, or I think the other one's called a Passmo card. So those are your options: cash, Suica, and you can use card, but I wouldn't recommend that. I think you can also be charged for using card in Japan, so that's something to look out for. I would like to know, if you're Japanese, is it different to adjust to UK? If you have been to the UK, is it weird to come here and use the card so much? Like, what is your personal experience with that? Because that's something I've never actually heard. I've heard a lot of tourists talk about how they adjust to using cash, but I've not really heard many Japanese people speak on behalf of coming to the UK and using a lot of card. That is something that I'd be really interested in hearing, and how they feel about it. Number 4, no ID. So with this, my life was altered forever. So in the UK, you may have heard that it's quite different to Japan. So by UK law, you're required to prove that you're 18 years old to receive alcohol. There's even like a challenge 25. So if you look under 25, you should expect to show your ID in a pub or a bar or a restaurant. So as a waitress, I was under the impression that you could go to prison for serving a minor. I'm not actually sure that's completely accurate now. So I don't know if I was just misled in that information, or maybe I misheard. But this, from what I've seen online here, I think in the UK, if you say a waiter serving a minor on accident, I think you'd be cautioned, or you'd be offered a £90 fixed penalty notice, or given an unlimited fine by the magistrates. Even in America, I think you can be fined up to about $1,000 or face imprisonment. So all of this sounds really super scary and intimidating, right? But in Japan, I didn't get ID'd once. And why is this? Why is it so different? So in the UK, I don't leave the house without my ID. Ever. Every pub, restaurant and bar, I get stared at for looking super young, and I feel like I'm gonna get kicked out at any moment. I can't go to the supermarket to buy like wine on Mother's Day without wearing makeup. Even with makeup, I would be like really uncomfortable, and the situation is always awkward just buying anything, almost to the point where I force my ID on people. They don't ask for it, I force it on them, just to save the embarrassment for me and for them. Like, I'm just so used to it at this point that it's become a normality for me. So a little story time about me. I've been ID'd for deodorant, energy drinks, chocolate liqueurs. I've been patronised in shops. People have said, "Oh, are you sure you want to buy this? This is a bit over your price range," thinking that I'm like 12 or something. Been laughed at by hospital staff. I've been belittled and patronized by customers and people on the street. Like, you name it, I've been through it, and I kind of give as good as I get at this point. Like, it's old news to me. But in Japan, there was none of it. Nothing. Like, no one ID'd me ever, and it was so weird yet so refreshing. Like, I got a taste of what it would be like to be normal. Maybe, kind of. You go into the shops, into the konbini, and it comes up on the screen and it asks you what age you are, and they give you the option to say whether you're old enough to buy that alcohol or not. So Japan is just different. I think there's a different level of trust, maybe. I don't actually know why this is. Maybe if you are Japanese or if you live in Japan, you could tell me why it's so different to the UK. Like, we could not be trusted. I feel like we really couldn't be trusted to make that choice ourselves. I think there'd be way too many teenagers pulling our legs with that one. And you can even drink on the street in Japan, which is, I don't believe it's encouraged in any way, shape or form, but it's a fact that you can do that, and in the UK you just can't. So culturally, I found that really different, but really refreshing and really nice for me as someone who's always lived with an ID stuck to their forehead. Like, yes, I'm old enough for the 1,000th time. I think I even tried to show my ID when they never even asked for it, and they looked to me really surprised and really like confused, I think. which is interesting. I think I've had that a few times here in the UK when I've gone to like Asian restaurants and they're like, why are you showing me this? But I'm just so used to people being like, you're not that old, you're not 31. Like, I feel like I just live with an ID attached to me at all times just to save the embarrassment of this situation. So IDing is something that is completely different in Japan. I would recommend taking your passport, and like I certainly did. I took my passport and ID most places. I think you'll often need your passport and they sign it and stamp it when you buy things in certain shops anyway. But it's just interesting to know that it is different to the UK, and maybe it is different to many other countries as well, I should assume. I mean, Japan has stores where I think you serve yourself completely anyway, and that was always a new concept to me as well. Never mind the IDing, like being completely trusted to buy alcohol on your own, but having a store completely run where there's no shop assistant, no cashier, like you just buy your own stuff and leave, like, and you leave the money in like a machine, I assume. Like I've seen videos of that, and it's like, that is always really, really shocking to me. And I feel like this concept would never work where I live. It just wouldn't. This is uniquely Japan. But let me know if you think that would work in your country. I'm really curious. Number 5, few vegetarian and vegan options. So one thing you may not know about me is that the first time I went to Japan, it was also in sakura season. You don't need to know that, but I just thought I'd let you know. I've been twice now in sakura season, and I'd love to go in a different time, actually. But the first time I went, I think I was vegetarian. I'd been at least vegetarian for 9 months, I believe. Vegetarian / vegan. I was just starting to be vegan because I was like cutting out eggs and cutting out milk.
I partake not in the meat, nor the breast milk, nor the ovum of any creature with a face.
And this was something I decided on my own. Like I was not brought up vegan or vegetarian. My family were quite against it, actually. I was born a meat eater. Obviously, I've always loved veggies. To be honest, I always leaned more towards a pescatarian diet anyway. So for me, I think cutting out sugar would have been way more difficult than cutting out meat, and I thought I could do it. So I wanted to test myself, and I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could. Obviously, there were many different reasons. I forgot my tea, oh my god. So there are many different reasons, some of which were to help the environment, because I loved animals, because I love veggie food anyway, because I wanted to challenge myself to make fresher, less processed meals, for health reasons. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, there are pros and cons for veggie diets and meat diets all over the internet. I think so much of it is so confusing to me, like contradictory, like whether you should, whether you shouldn't, whether it's good for the environment, whether it's bad for the environment, when it's good for your health or bad. I'm still unsure to this day, if I'm completely honest. But I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to try it. And it was meant to be a 2-week thing, and it ended up being a 9-month thing. So at this point, I was going to Japan and I was kind of conflicted, like, should I continue to be a vegetarian in Japan? Is that doable? Would I be missing out on a lot? These were all thoughts that I had before I went to Japan, and it quickly became quite clear early on into my trip that it was just becoming unnecessarily difficult for me to be a vegetarian in Japan. There are a lot of options for vegetarians. Not too sure about vegans. Maybe it's getting a little bit better as the years go on, but for vegetarians at least, there's a lot of dishes that you can try, I guess. There's tofu, pumpkin, a lot of veggie dishes like veg tempura, veg okonomiyaki, veg gyoza, I don't know, like noodles. Japan uses soybeans in a lot of dishes, but even so, I think it'd be really, really difficult to be vegetarian in Japan. I think most of their diet tends to be like meat, fish, veg. And I think if you cut out the fish and the meat, you're limiting yourself. Or for me at least, it felt that way. It felt like I was missing out in what could have been a once in a lifetime opportunity. For all I knew, I could be going to Japan just once in my entire life. And I didn't want to miss out. I'm such a foodie. I love everything. And when I say everything, I mean like I didn't want to just limit myself to veggie options and then always wonder, what does that taste like? Could I have tried this? Maybe things would have been different if I went on the trip with someone who was vegetarian also. Maybe that would have changed things. I don't really know. But it's safe to say I caved. I think I had like a sandwich with meat in, which is really weird for me because I wasn't a sandwich person at all before going to Japan. But I think at that point I was just about to crack. I just had a bite of a sandwich with me, and I don't even know, I think it might have even been beef, and I'm like the last person to have beef. I must have been gagging for some meat. That sounds really, really rude. But at that point I was just done with being vegetarian. I think it was taking its toll on my health a little bit. Not to say that I wouldn't go vegetarian again, but in Japan it is very difficult to be that, I think you definitely have to do a lot of research online before you go, or I think konbinis might be quite useful to you if you're vegetarian or vegan. You could read a lot of the labels and make sure that it is that way. I think in Japanese cuisine there's a lot of dashi. Dashi is a staple in the Japanese diet, and I think fish stocks and things, you might run into a few problems with that. One thing I do recommend is it's always helpful to learn a few phrases before you go. Say, これは vegetarian ですか? Or 肉が入ってますか? Things like that, simple phrases that you can ask them what's in it. Is this dish vegetarian, or does this have meat in? Just learn a few phrases and get comfortable with saying that. But even then, you might run into difficulties. It might be uncommon in Japan, maybe. If you're Japanese, let me know. Is it really that uncommon to see vegetarian and vegan dishes in Japan? As far as I'm aware, it is. As far as I'm aware, it's quite rare. I think a lot of dishes do have fish and meat in. Even with those few phrases, it may get confusing at times for them if they've not heard of vegetarian, if they don't know what vegetarian is or vegan is. A few popular options, a few dishes that you can try would definitely be mochi, veggie sushi, veggie onigiris, okonomiyaki and things. I mean, there's tons of vegetable dishes out there. Kare pan or curry bread, I think it is. Maybe they do a vegetarian version of that. There's definitely going to be more options available than there were in the past. But again, for me, it just wasn't worth the struggle to find it. And when I wanted to try so much and I wanted to experience Japan to the fullest and how the Japanese live, seafood and fish is a big part of the Japanese diet. And I think I did feel healthiest eating seafood, and I just wanted to try it. So for me, it was worth a change, but for you, it might not be. And there's definitely ways around it, but I think it would include a lot of research beforehand. These were my 5 biggest culture shocks you may encounter in Japan. I hope you're a little bit more aware of them now and slightly more prepared before your trip, if you are going to Japan. And if you're from Japan, maybe this gave you a little bit more insight into how things are in the UK and how they differ from you. I just did a recent video on 5 things the UK should steal from Japan, so maybe check that out if you haven't seen it already. There are some things that you might not expect. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like below. It means a great deal to me that you watch this channel. See you in the next one. Mite kurete arigato. Bye bye.